What's up, everybody? It's Sean Henry here again with Media Windog Watchapeg and also with Winnipeg Alternative Media. I'm back for another video. Today, again, I'm sorry, we are going to be talking about masks and whether or not they are effective and what the science says. I know I've talked about this to the degree of being almost infuriating. I'm getting sick of hearing myself talk about it even, but I had an epiphany and a realization last night about probably the strongest piece of scientific evidence that I've seen so far on whether or not masks are effective and what my interpretation of it has now become and what my questions about it have now become as a result of this epiphany. So I'm going to show you guys the piece of scientific literature, and I'm going to explain what my epiphany was, and then I'm going to explain what my question is now. Let's just go, shall we? So this right here is a piece from the International Journal of Nursing Studies from August of 2020. So it is very recent. And this is probably one of the best, if not the single best, pieces of scientific literature that I certainly have been able to find, but that maybe anybody is going to be able to find on whether or not masks are effective. And I will explain why it is one of the best pieces of scientific literature by reading the title, A Rapid Systematic Review of the Efficacy of Face Masks and Respirators Against Coronaviruses and Other Respiratory Transmissible Viruses for the Community, Healthcare Workers, and Sick Patients. And then I'm going to read the methods. This was a systematic review of randomized controlled clinical trials. Now, this is why this is such an amazingly high-quality piece of science. We're going to pop over real quick to my friend, the hierarchy of scientific evidence here. And if you will notice, the very top two pieces of the pyramid of science of hierarchy, or the hierarchy of scientific evidence, is systematic reviews and randomized controlled trials. So either of these two things on their own, either a systematic review or a randomized controlled trial, would be super high science, super high level science on its own. This piece that we're looking at here is a systematic review of randomized controlled clinical trials. So it is, like I said, one of, if not the very best single examples and pieces of scientific literature that you are going to be able to find on whether or not masks are effective. And here is what it has to say, and here is my epiphany as a result of what it has to say. A total of 19 randomized controlled trials were included in this study, 8 in community settings, 6 in healthcare settings, and 5 as source control. Most of these randomized controlled trials use different interventions and outcome measures. In the community, masks appeared to be effective with and without hand hygiene, and both together are more protective. Randomized controlled trials in healthcare workers showed that respirators, if worn continually during a shift, were effective, but not if worn intermittently. And this is the sentence that I'm going to base my entire video on here, right here. Medical masks were not effective, and cloth masks were even less effective. This is in a healthcare setting during a randomized controlled clinical trial. So the level of control and sanitation and implementation and enforcement that is going to be going on in these clinical trials in healthcare settings, i.e. hospitals, is going to be literally the highest level available. It's a healthcare scenario during a randomized controlled clinical trial. So the rules and scenario and controls are going to be as tight as possible. The sanitation and cleanliness of the environment is going to be as high as possible because, again, we're in a hospital. The enforcement of the masks, the usage, the selection, the implementation, the enforcement is all going to be done to the highest level because, again, these are hospitals. This is what they do. They have systems and methods in place for making sure that these things are done correctly and done properly and done effectively. And they're going to be, so like I said, it's a hospital setting, or at least a healthcare setting, in a randomized controlled clinical trial. So it's going to be the most controlled, most safe environment possible, most ideal environment possible. And if during that, medical masks were not effective and cloth masks were even less effective, my epiphany that I have had and my question that I now have is, what hope do the masks have at being effective in a real world community setting? Because again, in randomized controlled clinical trial setting where it's the safest, cleanest, most controlled, most ideal environment possible, in the community, masks still only appeared to be effective with and without hand hygiene. So in a real world community setting where people are constantly wearing their masks wrong, not wearing the correct kind of mask, pulling their mask down under their nose, touching their mask too much, not wearing their mask enough, the mask rules aren't being enforced properly. In a real world community setting, what hope do the masks have of being effective if they're not effective in a super highly controlled, super safe, super clean, super ideal, randomized, controlled clinical healthcare setting? You cannot, you would have to work, I'm not going to say you cannot because I'm almost always willing to be proven wrong, but you would have to work incredibly hard at this point to convince me that masks are going to be effective in a real world community setting when it says right here that they are not effective in a randomized, controlled, clinical healthcare / hospital setting. You're going to have to work really hard to convince me of that. So that's the epiphany that I had about this piece of science, which again is one of the highest, if not the single highest and most quality pieces of scientific literature that is available on this topic. You're going to have to work really hard to convince me that if masks aren't effective in a randomized, controlled clinical hospital setting, that they are going to be effective in a real world community setting. Because again, let's remember that old George Carlin quote about the general public. Think about how stupid the average person is, and then realize that 59 or 50% of the people are stupider than that, right? So that's my epiphany. That's my question. If the masks aren't effective in a healthcare hospital setting during a randomized controlled clinical trial, there's no way in hell that they're going to be effective in the real world, in the community where people are constantly using them wrong and selecting them wrong and their rules aren't being enforced properly. So that's basically all I wanted to say on this topic. I'm 99.5% convinced at this point that the masks are bunk and that there's no science to support it and that it's literally just an anxiety response that is meant to make people feel better. It's security theater. It's meant to make people feel better, but it's not actually doing anything to make us any safer. If anything, it could be doing more harm than good, and I'm going to get into that in another video. But for now, I'm going to leave this here. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, please like the video. Please subscribe to my channel. Hit that notification bell so that you get alerts when I put up new content. Go and follow me on Facebook, Media Windog Watchapeg, and then also please go and follow Winnipeg Alternative Media. That's another platform that I work with here in Winnipeg that does great work and has taken me on under their wing and I'm very grateful for. So please go and follow Winnipeg Alternative Media everywhere you can. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, all that good shit. And I will see you guys very soon for the next video. Ciao, ciao.